welcome to Half-Hearted. My guest today is, I don't really know how to describe your life. I know that you're a comedian, and I feel like you are just kind of living the dream at the moment, but I'll let you go more into that. But my guest it is Joe Arsenal.
Thank you, Jay. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
I'm a man of mystery.
Yes, you are. So let's talk about what made me want to have you on the podcast, and I feel like what has motivated a lot of our discussions in the past. Do you want me to fix that microphone for you? Like, I feel like it's blocking your view of me. Like, I could have it more like mine, where it's like, sorry.
Well, so much for a first draft.
No. Well, actually.
But you're right. Fixing the sight line is a good idea.
Yeah, we're going to be here a little bit. Okay.
It
Now
is
put
still
that-
a real human conversation.
Yeah, there you go.
after
Now
all.
put that up to your face hole again. Yeah.
How's that? Good
Yeah,
sound?
see, yeah, that's great, right? I can turn you down a bit. See, it's okay, right? It's
Much better.
early. It's early in the life of this podcast, right? We fail in front of no one. It's it's perfect. Okay, so what I was gonna say is, I feel like the one reason, like, other than I think you're a great guy and a funny comic,
That's a relief.
but I think usually when I meet gay people in the church, they have left.
Yeah.
I met having been to Bible college there. I've met a lot of those, and you have discovered Jesus and are on your way in, and I find that very fascinating. And so I guess I would start with, like, what is your like childhood? What is your background? You're white, so I can ask it.
Well, I mean, I grew up with my parents were both the black sheeps of their families.
Okay.
And basically, I always felt like an undercover spy as a kid because I bust into a rich white high school,
Okay.
but I was always the kid with like the poorest apartment because drug dealers have cash, but they can't get mortgages and leases.
Yes. Okay.
So I always felt like an outsider, and I was raised atheist. I was baptized, but then, my dad had a lot of cynicism about the
Mhm.
church he'd grown up in, and my mother had also been raised atheist, which is before it was cool.
Wow. Yeah, I would say, because that would how old are you?
43.
43. Yeah. So you're only a couple years older than myself, which would mean that, like, your mom was being raised atheist in the 60s, 70s, right? Like, along those lines, and in a time where largely everybody had some sort of faith or religious kind of association.
Yeah, well, and I mean, skip to the punchline. She's I just found out that she's doing the RCIA to become a Roman Catholic now.
See, he'll get you. He'll get you.
But yeah, I always grew up very secular, public
Mhm.
school.
Yep.
And I was aware of Christianity through culture references.
Yes.
But it was, it's always the sad fact that the loudest Christians get the most attention, and they tend to be the dumbest ones.
Yes. Yeah. Fair. Well, and especially in the 80s, when it dominated culture so much,
Mm.
right? Like, you couldn't run for president unless you said it vocally, no matter which party at the time.
Well, and I mean, a lot of people, the people who identify most strongly with Christianity as a brand, which is problem one, are always the people who are against having fun, which is a very strange message to take from the Gospels.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, it seems as though, the Jesus who came to bring freedom, the guy who had, whose yoke was easy and his burden was light, I feel like a lot of people just ignored that. We're going to make it harder. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the GTA?
Yeah, I grew up in Scarborough.
Okay.
But I bust into a high school in like Toronto proper. It was very. I spent a lot of my life on Eglinton Avenue. Let's put
Okay.
it that way.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and I feel like I had a very kind of similar upbringing because I grew up in Thornhill.
Mhm.
And I would say that a lot of the kids who went to my school it was a very predominantly Jewish school. And if you weren't Jewish, you were probably directly from China or Hong Kong,
Mm.
or had parents who were, and I found, and my parents rented, right, and so
Yeah.
I was in an affluent neighborhood, but was not affluent myself, so I can really identify with that. And again, my dad was I think he got out of Catholicism as early as he possibly could, and I was also not raised religious at all. Okay, so that's your kind of, and so what kind of kid were you?
Well, I was you know, one of the every time you have a kid, it's such a gamble, right?
Yeah.
It's random. You may get someone very much likely you, and you know how to relate to them, and you may get someone unlike anyone you've ever met, and you're responsible for raising this person, right?
Mhm.
So I was this bizarre child prodigy who taught himself to read by age 4, and
Whoa. Okay.
was always drawn to geography. Like my dad always wanted me to play soccer and t-ball, and I was like, "Can we go on a subway ride just for the fun of it?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I It was a lonely journey, let me tell you. Weird kid.
Okay. Were you an only child?
Yeah, until I was 10, which is so I mean, in terms of psychological identity and how you're shaped, I count as an only child.
Okay. 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 That makes sense.
How about you?
I have a brother who's about 2.5 years younger than me,
Mm.
and then my parents divorced when I was 7, and both remarried. So then I have my dad got remarried, and so I have a half sister. My mom got remarried, and I have two half brothers.
Yeah, you have good like older brother through difficult times vibes. So I
Yeah,
get
I mean, other than I was the one who created the difficult times,
it.
and it's hard because all of my like half siblings were born in the mid. I was born in '82. My half siblings were all born in the mid '90s or later, and so functionally, I was more like an uncle
Mm.
to them, especially by the time they're aware of the world, right? But I was a weird like kid. I always liked kids. I liked babies. Like I liked like I liked interacting with kids,
Yeah.
and so I was at least fun. But yeah, and so but I mostly live with my dad towards like the latter half.
But I had that experience too.
Mhm.
I have a half sister 10 years younger and a half brother 19 years younger, and uh
Well, yeah, yeah. So you're functionally more Uncle Joe.
well, now that my brother is in his mid 20s,
Yeah.
I I've remarked on this with him how our relationship was more like uncle nephew while he was a kid,
Yes.
but he just got old enough that I can relate to him as an adult, and I feel like I didn't get the childhood experience of having a brother, but I am
Mm.
getting the grown up one.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Well, like because it's not like you're functionally an uncle, but you still have you're still brothers, right? And so that opens doors. Like I feel like for lack of a better term, like relational intimacy.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
we're a lot closer than uncle nephew tends to be.
yeah, yeah, that you right, hope for. Okay, so I don't know where to go with this one. I
So,
did. Sorry, no, continue. Sorry.
well, going from how did I get here from atheist?
Well, I mean, I want to get to there eventually, but I
Oh,
want to just know more about you.
oh,
We could talk more. We have got a lot of time to talk about God. He'll be around, but it's because the thing I wanted to go with was
Mm.
so when did your parents split?
Oh, uh, long and messy. But age 5 through 7 with
Yeah.
a lot of rapprochements that should not have happened. And
Oh yeah. I mean,
yeah,
yeah. Geez, we're so similar.
well, I mean, you know, I vowed to be so different from my parents, and
Hmm.
my parents were in the active process of breaking up in front of me for most of my memory of their time together.
Me too. Yeah.
And yeah, well, I honestly that kept me in a marriage a little longer than it should have.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm I just well, this is jumping a bit ahead in my narrative, but I'm on very good terms with my ex after a 17-year relationship, but we were not a good match, and we understood that about each other
Mm.
after a while. And we like the my motivation for wanting to be married and wanting to, you know, stay in this relationship just for the sake of honoring a promise when neither of us are benefiting from it.
Mm.
It was just because of measuring my life as not doing what they did, but
Yeah.
it turned out the correct way to do that was to find a healthier way to say this isn't working and
Would
figure
you
out.
say it was like almost every day that you continued to be stay married was an in some way still a victory over your parents.
Yeah, yeah. I needed, um, it was an external benchmark to validate myself and be better than my parents, which you could say that like coming around to a Christian way of thinking
Hmm.
eliminated the need to compete with them.
Yes. Okay. Okay. When did you become aware that you were gay?
Ah, it was 1993.
Okay.
The peak year for AIDS deaths had been 1992, but we didn't know that yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It Everyone's story is different, and this, by the way, is a question I never get tired of asking gay men.
Yeah.
Like, we love to swap. Like, what was it like for you? And uh, my story is pretty common, but it's always strange how different some are because uh, the way I see it, like looking back on who turned my head, but my train was always on the track toward males,
Okay.
but there was no fuel in the engine until puberty hormones abruptly kicked in age 12, 13,
Okay.
and there was just abruptly no ignoring it. And
Yeah. Because I remember being like you were saying, there's no fuel in the tank, but I remember being 6, 7, and seeing girls and thinking they were cute.
mm,
Like I remember being that young and thinking like, oh, I like how that looks, and
well,
and it's interesting you say that because yeah, I've noticed with gay men that I've talked to that I met one guy who said I don't think I was gay until my father died in his adolescence. He said I don't think I was until that happened.
really?
Yeah, and then I've heard some people that just say I don't know. Puberty hit and there it was, and then I guess before that, and then some people who like knew as early as they could think.
I,
And I feel like it runs that gamut.
I'd be very interested to hear the story of the man who believes he didn't consider that he was gay until a formative event, because something I've always found common among everyone I know who's gay is that it's innate and unchangeable. Like that's what it always feels like to me.
And I don't know. This was a guy who I was friends with, who I've lost contact with, who I wish Neil, if you're out there, I would love to see you again.
And by the way, you're outed.
Oh no, he was out.
Yeah,
He,
yeah.
oh, he was. Well, I'll tell you the story. He was he was a roommate of my friend Dan, and they were all together. But Neil went to church. That was the context with which I knew him.
Mhm.
But he was a dancer. But I thought like he was like a contemporary dancer. But I assumed, well, if he's in the church, he's got to be straight.
Mhm.
And so like I remember he came in to keep it like, please forgive me. This was like the early 2000s. He like got back from like rehearsal or something like that. I was like, how was dance practice? And he's like, Jason, you know I'm gay, right? I'm like, no. I like flat out like rejected it. I was like, no, you're not. And then and then the two roommates were like,
Mm.
so I don't know if that if it, I wouldn't I don't
Sorry, I'm
want to
still judging you. Go
no,
on.
no, it's fine. I don't know if he would say that now. I would love to see what he would think of it then. But I know, man, I wonder if I should cut this talking about somebody else's story. But like, I know that him saying that his father dying was a really significant part of his life, and it was simultaneously also the thing that kind of led him to God and stuff
Mm.
like that. So I don't want to go too much into it, but I there is a diversity in it, even in all the gay men that I've talked to.
Well, I mean, I truly think that, it's a spectrum, and most people get aroused by both genders in ways that no one gets a manual for, no one understands, and the ones that are socially convenient are celebrated, and you want to nurture those ones, and the ones that you don't know what to do with are so easily distracted and suppressed as long as you have some form of sexual outlet and life. And there are some of us where we're just the dial was set all the way to male on
Yeah.
me.
Well, and there's also that concept. I don't know. That same friend Dan was telling me that he saw that there was a study where it seems that with men, it is largely like they're obviously bi men, but largely it's like one or the other. It's either you're gay or you're very gay or you're very not gay. And then with women, it seems like their sexuality is far more fluid, far more malleable.
Moist.
You had to.
I'm going to hell for that one.
What did your parents know? Did they knew like the classic they knew before you knew kind of thing?
It's interesting you say that because I had to come out to them at age 18, and it was a shock.
Okay.
But I found out this weekend that my stepmother knew. Just like she told me that she and her mother and her sister talked about me, and they all knew me, and like just probably, these
Yeah.
were wiser people who realized, hey, gay men start as gay boys. What kind of person is that? Is that this
Yeah.
boy who doesn't date? Yeah, I think it's him.
Yeah. Okay. Or likes to travel the subway instead of sports. Okay. Um.
I
Oh,
mean, it had to have been obvious. Like I, a lot, you know, people are a lot of people who don't know me and don't know many gay men are surprised when I'm gay because it's not the image. If you've learned what a gay man looks like from RuPaul's Drag Race, etc., this is
yes.
not me. And I talk to a lot of men like me, and we all forgive the. I'm going to use a semi-offensive word that I'm entitled to use, but I get a lot of flack for it. But
Sure.
it's the shortest way to explain the kind of behavior I'm talking about. We were all very faggy
Okay.
as boys. Uh, like it had to have been obvious. I specifically remember me singing show tunes, walking through like
Okay.
the
Okay.
kitchen, and like, as a boy without self-awareness, and all young gays do this, like fashioning my bath towel into a dress around my chest. Like it's
Yeah.
like, what kind of human being do you think this is, if not a future homosexual man? Come on.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the day I scared the shit out of my dad. The first day I came down the stairs, goth, and he asked me if I was gay. That was his response. Was what he was. I wasn't. I just really liked Marilyn Manson, but like this was the mid '90s. So
Now, put it in perspective. Like, this is something I always try to touch on in my comedy, but it's like a third rail because if I get too real, I'm going to turn you off. But like, all gay men have to deal with just how unfathomably deeply society hates us.
hmm.
Like, oh, I was worried you were gay. No, you've just rejected all values and are feeling nihilistic and hopeless. Okay, goth is fine. Marilyn Manson fan
Yeah.
is fine as long as you're not a man loving another man. That's
Yeah.
the worst
Exactly.
thing.
That was
Marilyn Manson fan is worse.
I think in retrospect, it really, who would have thought the Christians were right about him all along? Eh? So I had a guest on who I asked this question to, and sadly, I did not get the audio of that podcast, which is like deeply saddens me. But I did have this question. I'm always curious about it, and I was curious about where you would come at it from, which is that you live in a heteronormative society, and you realize, and because that's the path that society sets out for you, right? Is you
Mm.
right, you go to school, you go to university, you meet somebody, you get married, you have kids, retire.
Mm.
That's the path. And then, so what is it like when you realize that path isn't for you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've, well, therapy helps.
Okay.
And in some ways, I benefited from coming of age right at a time when the cultural zeitgeist was homosexuals respectable now. Like, I,
Yes.
I came out of the closet the year Ellen DeGeneres did.
Yes. Okay.
And I don't think young people understand what a big seismic cultural shift it was.
Tell me about that.
So Ellen DeGeneres, she was a successful stand-up comedian and doing good, easy, accessible, corporate clean all the time,
Yeah.
and good at it, skilled. And she had a sitcom that was middling in the ratings
Hmm.
in the 90s that included plot lines about her character, also played Ellen, supposedly just like her, but trying to find love with men, of course.
Hmm.
Um, and when, I guess the ratings were so poor that the show was probably about to be canceled. And so, with the nothing to lose motivation, Ellen DeGeneres, who is a lesbian, bravely, when it was very, very risky to do so, came out of the closet and revealed that her character on the sitcom would as well.
Yes.
And there had never been a gay character on TV to now, except for Billy Crystal played one gay supporting character in the 70s. Then AIDS happened. And they were like, oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, and like I can't remember what year Birdcage came out, but like if there were gay characters, they were usually played by straight people
Mhm.
as well. And yeah, I can't think of of a sitcom or something. Definitely nothing on TV. I think movies you would have it here or there, but yeah, you're right. And so yeah, yeah, I remember the cover. Yep, I'm gay.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Like it made the cover of Time magazine
Mhm.
back when that meant something. Kids magazines were once everywhere. So
It's true.
like it used to be normal that we would all know what was on the cover of Time magazine this week because it was on the newsstand at the subway station. So
Well,
back then, everyone knew Ellen DeGeneres was the woman proudly standing in front of the text, "I'm gay." And the message that we all internalized was, oh, our parents might not hate us if we behave ourselves.
okay, gotcha.
Because she was wearing a knit sweater, not
Well,
like,
and yeah, tell me instantly. I'm like, what does behaving yourself mean?
well, it means being just like, there's so much pain in this world caused by people having a child with a plan for it.
Yes.
That's not how humanity is. But nearly every parent does it, even if that plan is as vaguely as, I just want you to be happy and, of course, get married and have kids.
Yes.
Um, and, I really felt that I could, you know, if I look back on it now, I believe there are some clues in the way I'm made about the way I'm supposed to live.
Yeah. Okay.
And what it is not is telling my parents, you can still love me even though I'm gay because I'm going to live exactly like you wanted me to live with one difference.
Yes. Yeah.
But that was, in some ways, previous generations of gays who, uh, I certainly don't envy those rejected by their families, but they were then immediately free.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So and for yourself, you kind of felt like you still had a tether because they accepted you enough, but with that, the tether was also strings.
Well,
Is that a fair assessment?
I perceived it as strings.
Okay.
I don't know, like nothing was ever said. I knew that, I was very lucky. My family's very supportive and comfort levels vary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken me a long time not to care about comfort. It's, it's something about me I've learned. I don't value comfort in myself or others, so
Okay.
it's fair. But I used to worry about it a lot too much, and I would always gauge, just how, like, I've recently started dating someone who does not hold back on public displays of affection or in front of my dad
Okay.
as well. And that was something that was always taboo before and would, something my ex-husband and I had in common was, of course, we would never make straight people uncomfortable by like, a kiss on the cheek or a head on the shoulder in front of my dad.
Yeah.
Um, and I've got to a place where I'm unafraid to do that. And my dad says, you two look cute together.
Yeah. Okay.
But I had to get to a place of fearlessness because of how conditioned we are to, live within the parameters of, is this okay? Is this okay?
Mhm.
Is this okay? Just to be yourself.
Mm-hmm. And so, what did you end up going to school for?
It's interesting. I cobbled together a Franken degree.
Okay.
I changed my major so many times. I dropped out. I went backpacking and discovered how much I love Japan.
Okay.
And I decided I just want to come back here and live, which it's very easy to get a work visa if you have a degree, any degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked, how many electives have I taken in these? And long story short, I cobbled together a triple minor, which they don't allow anymore.
Wow. Okay.
From the
Okay.
University of Toronto.
Yeah.
In political science, history, and religion.
Yes.
This was when I was an atheist.
Yes.
And at the time, it was all indecisiveness. But looking back, I think I can see a theme. I was well, first of all, I like being able to say in an argument, well, I have a degree in this,
Yeah, it's yeah, for some reason like when your actual arguments don't work, you can appeal to authority even though it's not a real argument, but somehow it works.
Yeah, from U of T too, right? So
Yeah,
like,
no less.
McLean's rankings are good for something. But I think a common theme is trying to figure out who in history, if anyone, has come up with the best answer to how can we all live together.
Yeah.
And it's kind of embarrassing to have come to the conclusion that my like grade 2 educated grandpa did.
What did he say?
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's because everybody who seems to say that they figured it out just ends up having sex with all the people that believe them.
Or
So
possibly with no exceptions, but who am I to say?
yeah, so you got, because same-sex marriage got legalized in Canada in 2003.
That sounds right, around
Does that
then.
sound right? And if you had been with your partner for, or did you get actually formally married?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Late into the relationship,
Okay.
we'd been together 7 years, and I realized, you know what? I don't want my mom to be next of kin. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
I
Uh,
I decided to get married for that like tactical region, thinking the certificate meant nothing. But by the time of the wedding day, I came around. It was a great day.
yeah. Okay. Um. So I know you worked really hard. I know that when we've talked before, you were making pretty good money. And that's where I wanted to go, which was
Mm.
that where did you so I feel like when you realize that the path that that society lays out is not for you, which gives you a sense of freedom. So what did you want your life to be like? You're an atheist, you've got your husband, you're making money. So like what was life like for you? I feel like you talk about your life in terms of like pre-breakup, pre-Jesus,
Mm.
and then there's after, which is kind of the phase you're in now. But what was that period like?
Yeah, I
I
was.
don't want to gloss over it, but I know it's a significant period.
It's funny. It's a big chunk of my life. It is my 30s, but I had 10 years that, yeah, I don't want to get too far into it, but in a marriage that wasn't working and meeting our needs,
Hmm.
and staying in it because that's what a good person does, and kind of doing the same with a job that was, very much the metaphor of the frog not getting out of the pot because the temperature is increasing a little.
Hmm.
Just like the stress and pressure and workload and mismanaged technology, kept getting more difficult every year. And I well, like, you know what? I won't gloss over it. I I'm a pretty well-informed layperson. I read widely, and I'm well-informed on psychology, and I was well-informed from reading about psychology about the study of suicide as a phenomenon.
Okay.
And I know that, most people who threaten suicide or attempt suicide are, the typical is young and female and looking for attention, never dream of actually ending their life.
Hmm.
But the flags for actual suicide, being successful on first attempt, uh, middle-aged, white, male, divorced, gay, uh,
Wow. Okay.
going through a departure from a job, which I had to like, and then it was um, making plans for belongings, setting a date, and coming up with a plan of like the anticipating obstacles to following through.
Yeah.
And at one point, I had a moment of lucidity where I realized, holy fuck, I've done all of this. I'm off the charts
Yeah.
risk. And
And
yeah,
where did the cracks start to form? Like when did you start to realize, was it in your relationship or was it at work? What one kind of started to crack first?
well, it was feeling trapped for
Yeah.
various reasons in a life that was not working for me. I had no creative outlet. I was in physically terrible shape. I didn't have the energy to eat well or exercise. I had become isolated from friends mostly because I just, I was always ending every day with no mental energy left, no emotional energy. And every weekend was recovering from the work week. And every vacation was recovering from work and preparing to go back to it. Right.
Hmm. What was work? You don't have to like name under the employer, but like what?
Yeah. I was in the travel agency industry.
Okay.
Yeah. Very, very tough business to make money in. And I was very, very good at
Hmm.
it. And I may go back to that industries. Let's stop that there.
Okay. No, I would have thought I feel like that industry, you have to be pretty good at it to make money at it now. I feel like that, you used to see travel agencies all over the place. And now I feel like not even what I think Flight Center was the big one. You don't even see that one anymore.
Let me tell you this because I'm proud of it, okay?
Yeah.
Our biggest competition was not other travel agents. It was the general idea that travel agents are useless because
Yes.
that's often the case. We'd never lost clients.
Yes.
And on the day that the prime minister said all Canadians around the world should come home and airline seats were disappearing faster than we could book them, Every client we had got through to a human being within 3 rings.
Yes. Okay. Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm
The-
proud of that, damn
Yeah,
it.
you should
So
be.
yeah, I was very good at that job, and I will be very good at my next one. And
Yeah.
you know what? Not this year.
Yeah, I know. You're balling. So so it's at this stage, so your marriage is I'm guessing at this point this is when you have the talk with your spouse.
Well, we were still together, and we were still a couple through a lot of my recovery, but just something clicked. Some internal core of self love that had not extinguished itself said, okay, like if I don't change something, I might actually follow through on this one day, and just treat it like an emergency.
Mhm.
Before you end your life, try bringing about the best version of yourself and see what happens. This was not easy to do during pandemic lockdown with everything closed, which, by the way, was probably a bigger harm on my mental health than my work and my marriage combined.
Mm.
It turns out I need to see a human face every day that's not angry at me, and
Yeah.
when you're locked down with a spouse, that's tough.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, I sought out some mental health solutions which weren't really available during the pandemic.
Mhm.
Um, and I I had read. Are you familiar with Michael Pollan's book How to Change Your Mind?
Yes.
So I don't know if your podcast listeners are very familiar with this book already because it's much talked about, but
Yeah.
it introduced me to the concept of drugs being an emergency alternative mental health treatment that turns out works. Uh,
Yes.
and um, and yeah, I like it. It cured my depression so fast, and I did not expect how.
Yeah. Uh and when would this have been? So 2020, 2021?
Yeah, this was 2021. I I tried, like, there was some fumbling with the conventional mental health supports, which I had a good therapist, which helped a lot. Um, Tried some medications, which just felt very wrong to me. I wanted to engage with my emotions and make my life so that my emotions feel good,
Mhm.
not rely on an adjustment, which
Yes.
feels a little less authentic to me. Um, and yeah, the and like something really clicked when I read that book because I never so let me back up a bit.
Sure.
I mentioned my parents were the black sheeps of their family. My dad was a drug dealer all throughout my childhood.
Okay. What did he deal?
Um, I have a lot of good jokes on stage about my dad being a weed dealer because that's funny. I don't mention the cocaine on stage. It's not.
Fair.
Um, and I It turns out that weed is very good for my head.
Okay.
But when your dad's a drug dealer and you need to create your own identity and rebel, you abstain from all drugs.
Yeah.
So I didn't smoke weed till it was legal,
Yes. Okay.
and it has been instrumental in. I felt long before I read the Michael Pollan book that people aren't taking this seriously enough. The stereotype of the pothead is someone who eats snack foods endlessly and plays video games on the couch, which, by the way, is my dad to a T.
Yes.
There's truth to that stereotype. It doesn't have to be that way. I began turning my physical fitness around by discovering the joy of working out stoned.
Okay.
And I kind of made a deal with myself. I like being stoned so much. I can keep doing it if I force myself to be a high functioning user. So,
Yes. Okay.
and I kept pot really spurs creativity. So I would keep getting ideas while stoned that I would force myself to follow through on about, okay, if I'm going to, be a high functioning overall person and be a better person, how can I do it? And I, it's really been beneficial. And Michael Pollan really articulated something I'd been feeling, but not been able to put into words about how drugs should be taken more seriously than they are in our culture. We infantilize them.
Hmm.
Jumping ahead to the faith thing, like,
Well, that was going to be my next question, which
yeah,
is
yeah,
like, where and how does God enter the picture for you? You're raised atheist. You are
yeah.
functional, like you are an atheist, or maybe, I don't know, an agnostic up to this. So what happens? How does God break in?
Well, I, I've been reading old journals to try to figure out the chronology here because I'd been one of the things that had really spurred my depression. We all know it. We don't really talk about it. We've all agreed not to talk about the doom of the planet. Let that sink
I
in.
don't care about that at all.
Yeah, that's like, the science says that
Yeah.
our planet is doomed. Scroll past that news article or don't, but can you live happily knowing that? And it was through reading on climate change and social justice that I discovered that it gave me hope to know that, you know, think of it this way. Imagine if we are going to change human behavior enough to generate hope for the future. What preconditions would have to be met? Would it help you to know that the leader of the world's biggest organization, present in every country where they haven't banned it, that anyone can join for free, is desperately screaming, "Hey, can we all do this? Like, discard capitalism if we have to, but actually save the world."
Hmm.
So I found out about Pope Francis's efforts to get all Catholics behind, maybe stop burning fuel and eating meat if it means you can have great grandkids.
Yeah.
So when I did my Hail Mary, I'm using that ironically, but it turned out to be true, mushroom trip to heal my mind, and I became instantly intuitively aware, oh, of course there's a God. I kind of always knew.
Yeah.
But I was encouraged to switch that off, and I got good grades in school if I answered scientifically and atheistically to every question, right?
Well, and also, it's like the people on that team make that team look very unattractive.
Exactly. It's I always most of what I knew about religion was from movies.
Hmm.
Um,
Which in secular culture almost never portrays it positively.
and I felt a deep, maybe not deep, but I had admiration and envy for Jewish people because I knew from a lot of movies that they had, if you believe there's a God, they had a intellectual religious tradition of using your full brain to figure out what would God want from us.
Hmm.
And all I knew about Christians is it seemed to be a competition to see who could turn off your brain most loudly.
Which is ironic because it is from Christianity that we get science, right?
Mm.
Like the earliest, the creation,
Islam
like
has a claim, but go on.
I think it's perfectly everybody who it's science was created because people believed that that the universe was rational, that it ran on pattern, that it was created with design,
Hmm.
that it could be analyzed and discovered, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I found out, I'd known long ago that like the loud back at a time in my intellectual development when I thought Christians are people who don't want us to learn about evolution and therefore want to stop all scientific progress. Um, Somehow, I think I learned as a fun fact in a Roger Ebert movie review that that's not Catholic teaching. Like, so I always knew,
Hmm.
okay, these aren't the dumb ones. Not saying, uh, the Catholic Church is a big tent church. We come in a wide variety of intellectual abilities, but you can be very smart and find a spiritual home in the church that I have.
And what drew you to Catholicism? Because for me, and when I went through my like mushroom trip, like I looked at like if I had to choose between Eastern Orthodox Catholicism and evangelicals, like evangelical looked the most fun.
Hmm.
Like I could play
If you're
music
straight.
there. Sorry, if you're well, yeah, absolutely. If you're straight, was like but why Catholicism?
Yeah, well, it started because of my awareness of Pope Francis literally trying to save the world.
Yeah.
I had an innate sense that okay, there is a God, what to do about it? The answer is, you know, step one was, well, every religion is tainted, so I'm going to be a religious person thinking about how best to live in this world independently and alone. That's not working.
Hmm.
Um, and I figured, okay, I'm not sure how I feel about the Jesus stuff. I'm curious. I've read I know from anthropology that ritual is good for us, so why not me too? Like during lockdown, during the second COVID lockdown, the Ontario government closed down everything except religious services.
Hmm.
And that got me wanting to go to a church. I want to hear someone sing a song.
Hmm.
And I chose Catholicism because of the environmental thing. And I just thought, and also, I knew that Pope Francis was pulling the Catholic Church in you know, direction that's respectful of homosexuals as fast as he can.
Mm-hmm.
It When I identified as an atheist very early in his papacy, you may not remember this incident, but it made headlines around the world when a reporter asked him on a plane to Italy something about homosexuals, and he said, "If someone is homosexual, who am I to judge?"
Yeah.
And as an atheist, I was shocked how much that affected me emotionally.
Okay.
And that combined with this environmental doctrine made me think maybe, you know,
It's worth checking out.
maybe this is the church I go to.
Hmm.
It was fully my intention to shop around for churches.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at it now, shopping around is the opposite of faith.
Yes. Yes.
But every effort I made to try to attend a church that wasn't Catholic, there was some obstacle in the way. They were still Zoom only for COVID safety, or I went to England, they charge admission if they're famous. And there was always a Catholic church down the road that was open and I
Yeah.
could just walk in for free. And I was like, you know what? Maybe he can lead us places.
Hmm. What do you make of? Because this is something that, like, especially when I was really hardcore Christian, which
Mhm.
was that, like, I never personally had any animus towards gay people. Like, I never hated anybody. Like, it was what the Bible said about it was frankly inconvenient, right? Like, it conflicted with how I really felt about gay people. On the other side of it, though, there's also like, I see dog mass at the Pride Parade. I'm like, you
Mhm.
know, but you see what I mean? Like when there's like you and your partner, like there's two guys, you don't have any choice in who you're attracted to. You want to live together. Like, how do you reconcile what the Bible says about homosexuality and still embrace it?
Well, I'm proud to be a very unusual Christian. The starting point of my faith is creation.
Hmm.
And I don't view scripture as quite as sacred as most Christians do. The humans who compiled and wrote the Bible were flawed mortals doing their best. Who's to say that, like, let me tell you about scripture's role in my faith, though, before I get to what the Bible says about gays, because I I read Laudato Si, which is Pope Francis's document about climate change. I'd
Hmm.
read about it and I decided, okay, I should upgrade this and read his actual words. And I was so moved. This man is trying to save the world and to persuade us to help.
Hmm.
And I also came away from it thinking, okay, he seems like an intelligent person who's thought of everything. And he really means the Jesus stuff.
Yes.
A smart person who I think is smarter than me can believe that. You know what? I want to see what these gospels are about.
Hmm.
And I embarked on a project as a new hobby. I'd been speed reading books for nearly 40 years at this point, and I didn't want to skim. So I transcribed the gospels. I
Okay.
copied them by hand as I wrote them. I have 4 notebooks at home, each my
Yeah.
copy of the gospels in my handwriting.
I've heard of people who that's the only way they can read. Yeah.
It was the richest spiritual experience of my life.
Hmm.
When you write something, it activates the part of the brain that writes, and I felt I got to know the writers of the 4 gospels in a way I would not if I'd only written them. And you don't get to know the gospels by just hearing the excerpts they read in church.
Mhm.
You have to read the whole things to know what's not in them, and you have to read the whole things to know what the themes are that keep coming out.
Mhm. There's context outside of isolated verses.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not enough to know what Jesus said. It's important to know what he said a lot and repetitively
Mhm.
and what wasn't so important. Um, it was while I was reading the Gospel of Mark that I just started to have the uncanny feeling. Mark is the writer with the brain most like mine.
Mhm.
He writes like I do. The writer of John was drunk while writing. No way around it. I sometimes write while drunk too. I edit sober, but paper was more valuable then, right?
Okay.
Like, and beer was safer and cheaper to drink than clean water back then, so it's quite plausible. I digress. The writer of Mark has a brain like mine, and he persuaded me. This is not a human being making up exaggerated stories. This really feels like someone as smart as me trying desperately to persuade me. Like, I really saw this. I don't understand it. This happened.
Yeah, I mean, like that. It's also Mark. I find is very jumpy. it's like then this happened and
Yeah.
then this happened
Get
and then
to the
this happened.
point. That's
Right,
kinda
right, and
me.
it's that's
Except when I'm talking, when I'm
it's
listening.
well, it's arguably the shorter. I think it
Yeah.
is the shortest one,
He's concise.
right? But then you look at the contrast, which is like which is Luke, which is the by far the more analytical
Hmm.
of the four. Because I feel but Luke was not a disciple, right? He was a guy, he was a doctor who was like taking into account and trying to like put it all together.
Well, Luke is the one I barely remember because I did them in order. And reading Mark changed my life. Reading
Mhm.
Matthew was, oh, okay, this is all familiar to me from pop culture. Good to know. Oh, the Salome head thing is in the Jesus story. I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Things like that. And Luke was like, yeah, okay. And then John was a whole other revelation. Um,
In what way?
well, you know, I was shocked by my emotional reaction to completing the project. I was filled with blinding rage.
In what? And over what?
So I hate to, I'm not going to use modern labels to talk about people from the distant past.
Okay.
But considering that males drawn to other
Oh
males
yes.
rather than females are a category of human who's always existed.
Hmm.
All the things that perhaps, shall I say, most strongly indicate that that might be the kind of human being Jesus was. And I'm not saying Jesus was gay. I'm not, but I am offended by the notion if you say it's offensive that he might have been. Because why would that be offensive if we're not a lower category of human being?
When we were talking about this a little while ago, and you mentioned that, and there was a person who I won't name who barged into that conversation who was not even a believer, but was really offended by that insinuation.
And that is offensive. We are a category of, if we're a category of human being God makes, which the record seems to support. We tend to be happy when left alone among ourselves. There is no cure and it cannot be prayed away. So maybe there's nothing wrong with it. Category of human being. Well, I'm not just all the. I can't tell you how shocking it was to me to see that, the writer of the Gospel of John, to identify himself, points out, I was the one who had his head on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper.
Hmm.
Uh, that's boyfriend behavior. It's not certainly boyfriend behavior, but it's not boyfriend behavior.
Mhm.
What it is love between men that in our current culture, all men who aren't out gay would never allow themselves to do because they're afraid of seeming gay, even though Jesus said, love each other like I loved you. Like homophobia is Christianity's problem, not mine, is the way I see it.
Okay. Then how do you reconcile, say, the passages from like Paul?
Well, first,
Because
yeah.
the only thing that I would say is I don't know enough to necessarily I'm sure that there's like a lot of guys that would argue, a lot of theologians that would argue the point that Jesus was not gay. Let's say he was. In order for him to be a perfect sacrifice, he couldn't act on that, whether he was straight or not. Right? Like I don't think
Well, says who? Because that's not what he said.
what do you mean?
He never said he didn't have a sex life. He never said had to like.
But
he
sex
was-
outside of marriage would be a sin, and he was not married. And then which means that if he sinned, then he's not a perfect sacrifice. And that means these are the things I like. This is the stuff I'm wrestling with now. Is the like if the whole significance is that he was the perfect sacrifice. He was God and man simultaneously, and that is why that sacrifice is infinite.
Well, okay. A lot of this is semantics. Uh, the concept of gay person did not exist back then, and it's also quite possible that
I'm not sure that that's true though, because like with that we found like clay. I say we, but like archaeologists have found clay pots of men you know,
Having sex with other men.
yeah, or like holding another guy's junk or something
Yeah.
like that. And so I think
Yeah.
people were well aware that there were people who were wired that way back then, and it wasn't always slave relationships.
But it wasn't a separate category of human being. Sex with men was something men do sometime, and they might have used a whole other word for it.
Okay,
Some men do
okay,
it, some don't. Some only want to do that, some don't. But it, the notion of these categories of human beings and sexuality as identity is very new, and
okay,
it can be very liberating to realize there's another way to think.
okay. Sorry, I guess going back to the
Oh,
going back to
let me go back to the rage because
no,
that was good.
I just mean, so what do you make of Paul's prohibitions of it in the New Testament?
Well, so
Or, and
yeah,
the other half of it is, because this is the thing that people say, is Jesus never outright condemned homosexuality,
you never mentioned it.
which is true, but he also claimed to be the same God that dictated the prohibition of it in the Old Testament.
But so
And again, I'm
yeah,
asking this to challenge
yeah.
to get to the bottom of it. I'm not trying to be
Oh,
like,
of course.
you're like, I hope
You're
you get
curious about my approach to the scripture.
exactly.
So it's this simple. I believe that the Bible is useful as a record of what Jesus said and did. Like the premise of Christianity is God created a one-time special person with instructions for us, and if we all do what he says, earth will become heaven,
Mhm.
basically. And I buy that. I never expected to buy that. I do. Um,
Yeah, if everybody said, what would Jesus do every day, what world would we live in?
exactly, right? Like there'd still be suffering and death and pain, but there
But we would
there
be
wouldn't
less
be hunger or
responsible.
war.
Yeah, well, we would be less responsible for it.
Yeah. Like disease is still going to happen, but we could, if humanity all decided, have no one ever die of gunshot again.
Hmm.
That's a decision we could all make instantly. We don't, but the faith of Christianity is one day it's going to work.
Hmm.
Um, but I view the Bible as useful only as a record of what he did and said, and everyone else who wrote anything is a flawed human being who lived in a culture and may have got some things wrong. It always staggers my mind how many people are caught up on the Old Testament prescriptions on homosexuality when
Hmm.
if there was nothing wrong with the religious texts of the Pharisees and religious practices of the Pharisees, Jesus would not have been necessary.
Yes.
This is the text of the religion he came to reform. He what do we know from the Gospels of Jesus' approach to the Old Testament and Scripture? He took comfort from it. He used it to win arguments, usually against people who were using it wrong.
Yes.
And he was for the record is so fragmentary. There are so many questions we don't know if it
Well,
was
I mean, you're
asked.
not wrong, because like he and the disciples were rolling grain in their hands in the field and
Yeah,
popping it into their mouths, and they were doing it on the Sabbath, and that was wrong. And you're right. So there were times when he kind of walked right in the face of Old Testament prohibitions.
he was asked so many times about what should we do regarding like the scriptures and what behavior should we do, and the only part of the Old Testament he only drew a follower's attention to was the Ten Commandments,
Hmm.
and the only clarification he gave on that was, the bit about the Sabbath, don't be too legalistic about it.
Hmm.
And he added the one more about loving each other as your neighbor. And
Yeah, love one another as yourself, which is apparently not a, like, it wasn't at the time a new phrase. Love your
mm,
neighbor as yourself. Like that
it was
wasn't
already an Oprah throw pillow.
apparently. Yeah, it was something that people already use, which I learned that from somebody who was like trying to critique him, and I was just like, oh no, he used a phrase that everybody knew to make a point. Like what an what a jerk. Okay.
But I think anyone using the the writings of Saint Paul, a good man doing his best in the culture of his time, uh, and the Old Testament to say that anyone created with the slightly different sexual instinct I have is bad unless he ignores his instinct his whole life, which is a very difficult thing to do.
Mhm.
Uh, that runs contrary to the experience of creation. This is how humanity is. And I'm not too fussed about it at all. It's very surprising to me how often people think that this other scripture is a gotcha when it tells us so little about Jesus. It's people trying to follow God's will and maybe not getting it right, but doing their best. End of story.
If you reflecting on, so now you're in this place of like accept, like what you call yourself a Christian, right?
But yeah, I go to
Yeah.
church.
Yeah, you go to church, and so you're live. So how does that make you reflect back on, how do you read gay culture in light
Mm,
of that?
you know, we're we're not doing well, to be honest. It's like I believe I am fast I am fascinated with the question of if we have a creator who creates us this way, which, you know, I believe is fact, then what are the implications? Why does he make us this way? Um, the zeitgeist among gay men, the many I know and what I see on social media, it tends to be that, because established religion is so steeped in homophobia and has hurt so many of us at all, you know, fuck God, that's for idiots.
Hmm.
Uh, and it really, really pains me that so many of us are robbed of our spirituality and connection to the God that I can feel uh, because of this hurt. It's I go to the uh, the Roman Catholics in Toronto, the Jesuits, who are, speaking of the Christians who use the full brain to worship
Okay.
God. They run a monthly outreach mass for Catholics who aren't straight, basically,
Hmm.
and uh, that's a really good faith community. I always go when I'm in town, just because there's always going to be someone nervous who's there for the first time, and I want to raise the numbers and add to the
Yeah.
like hello welcomes you're going to get, you know. But also for me, I really like being around these guys. But um, it's not for me to comment too much on other people's faith journeys. But it pains me how common gay men who have not turned their back on religions, it is still very common for some people to be wrestling with not going to hell.
Yes.
When I'm more interested in saying, if we are good because we are created and God wants some people not to have, the way I put it is most people have a sexual instinct that leads to babies.
Hmm.
I have one that leads to friends if done right.
Yeah.
I believe this might be pleasing to God if, like, why
Well,
wouldn't it be?
but the one thing, and this is a discussion I had with an earlier podcast guest, was the more about the fact that, like, I think that sexuality is really important to who we are. And
Mm.
I think that, like, it's the act that makes children, so it should be treated with, respect and care. Um, and I find, and you can correct the stereotype I'm about to espouse, but I don't think promiscuity is good for anyone.
Mm. No, let me tell you, I, so through my discernment, like, one thing that's really frustrating about being a gay Christian committed to using my whole brain is I really want to answer the question, what would a usage of my sexuality pleasing to God look like?
Hmm.
And I feel so alone with that because, it's the official Catholic catechism, the mainstream view, you know, what a priest is obliged to say because it's catechism is, oh, the correct answer is you should do absolutely nothing and be abstinent your whole life.
Yes, that is like what the evangelicals would say too. Okay, you're gay, fine, don't act on it ever. That's what they would say.
However, very early in my faith journey, before the mushroom trip, I it was when I was having the best sex of my life to date that I had a spiritual epiphany that if there's a God, he wants us to be happy. If there's a creator God, to give me the instinct to seek this out. When I say the best sex of my life, I'm not talking about some, you know, intense, technically virtuosic porno
Sure, yeah.
performance. I
So,
mean, heart, mind, and body,
mhm,
everything working the way it's supposed to be, and everything feeling right in the world, with a lot of love in it.
mhm.
And just to give me the instinct to seek this out and make me feel this good when I find it. If there is a God, he wants us to be happy. The best things in life truly are free. And I think sexuality is a great gift. And it is probably, people always misunderstand what Catholics mean when we talk about sin. It just means any way you're diverging from God's ideal.
Mm.
And on that tone, I think it would be a sin not to take advantage of this gift he wants us to have.
Because I can't. I feel like if straight people applied that, then we have children born to mothers and fathers who aren't married.
Mm. Yes. And well, this is my opinion.
And you run the. Or I know it's still the statistic that HIV is still high amongst gay men.
Well, okay, let me take a brief intermission to educate the straights.
I love it. I love it. Like but I know, but that you also run this risk as well, right? And so
HIV transmission is very low compared to when the plague was going strong, because nearly everyone with HIV is on medication. That means they can't pass it on.
Is that what PrEP is?
No. PrEP is a pill taken...
I've always wanted to know what PrEP is. I see them on the ads on the subway.
PrEP is a pill you can take if you would otherwise be at risk of HIV exposure. 1 pill a day and you can't catch HIV no matter what you do, basically.
Really?
It's much safer than condoms ever were.
That's crazy. I had no idea that this existed.
So there are still a lot of gay men with HIV, but the reason there's so many gay men with HIV is, thank God, they stopped dying around 1996.
Okay.
So yeah, and it doesn't seem to take much time off you. This is not anyone's entitled information, but it's part of my experience. Like, I'm HIV negative at great personal sacrifice. And one of the greatest ironies of my life is that thanks to fantastic modern medicine, it seems that these days HIV doesn't significantly take time off your life. My anxiety over catching it over the years definitely has.
Okay, fair. Yeah.
Nonstop terror.
And thank you for thank you for accommodating it. I feel like I need to be open with my ignorance if it's ever going to be corrected.
Well, this is something that really bothers me. It's an effect of the atomization of our culture that most people don't think about. I knew about the AIDS plague growing up because I watched the news. And I think that's a very good thing for a family to do. These days, it's usually scroll on your phone and skip the articles that don't interest you. It is a little painful, but it is the truth, that the effective end to the greatest plague of our lives is considered niche information because it only saves gay lives. There was a news story about this. You didn't click. I don't blame you. No one does, unless they're gay.
Yeah, or it's not even put in my feed to begin with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's shocking how many things that if you cared about people different from you, who make up a huge percentage of our population, not huge, but there's a lot of us, we matter. It's shocking how many things crucial to our lives are not covered in the mainstream press.
So
part of it I don't want you to know, so that's fine.
No, that's fine. I love learning. Like, I watched a documentary called "Do I Sound Gay?" I don't know if you've ever seen it. And,
I'm glad you watched that. You are educating yourself on how we torture ourselves.
Yeah, I thought I always find other people's perspectives, or I always find it fascinating to especially when it's niche, right? I really love that, and so I always want to learn about the deep cuts, right? Like the inside baseball about gay culture or whatever it happens to be, the stuff that I'll never find out on my own if I don't ask.
Inside baseball. That sounds like a fisting porn I'd watch. Too much.
So where does comedy enter the picture?
So I spent a lot of the pandemic, I did a lot. There's a lot of answers to the question. So I spent the pandemic getting fit. This was, looking back, an early expression of my newfound religious faith, which before it was Christian, before it was prayer, before it was going to the Catholic Church, it was trying to bring about, if I have a creator, what version of myself would he like to see?
Okay.
And in early lockdown, I thought, well, I guess you'd do push-ups in my bedroom. And it started with that. And I spent a lot of lockdown taking long walks through neighborhoods with more trees than mine to try to maintain sanity, listening to music, smoking weed for the first time in my life, and thinking up jokes and daydreaming about if I one day would have the courage to get on a stage. And it was a weird time in my life because I was starting to... Okay, I don't want to be too full of myself. Sexy is subjective. We all have our tastes, but There's also an adjective called hot that applies to how close or far you are from our culture's fascist Hollywood body and face ideal, which is always a white person and could be cast as the president. I and you get privileges the more you look like that.
Yes.
So I'm not saying I'm the sexiest guy in the world, but I want to share how unusual it is because I recently in middle age turned hot for the first time.
Mm.
And people started looking at me, and I always assumed it was because they could tell I was stoned. It was weird. I couldn't even enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I eventually dared myself into it, and I recently found an old journal of like starting creating this good person, this best version of myself that has a creative outlet. It started as daring myself, like, okay, I guess if I were going to write a story about the person who I'd like to become, he would start writing down jokes, and then he would go to an open mic, and he would drink enough to get on stage, and next time he would do it with less beer, and
Yeah.
it's just been a great joy of my life.
Where did you do your first open mic?
It was at uh, Mandy's Bistro on Danforth.
Yeah.
They had an irregular open mic, and I happened to see an ad on. It was a handbill on the street, and I was 4 beers and 2 joints in, and I slurred through with high energy. And this was a dire open mic. I haven't been to a worse one since. No fault to the host or venue. It was just multiple people back to back who should not be encouraged. Like, dude, you don't know what a joke is. You're
Yeah.
just doing therapy here. Like, it was a night of nonstop that.
Yes.
I was terrible and not ready, and I was the third best one of the night, guaranteed.
Did you did you walk away feeling like there's something to this for me?
I came back wanting to do better. And
Yeah.
I did a bit about this humorous observation I'd noticed that a big part of how I got fit was swimming. And if you decide to take swimming seriously, you need an athletic swimsuit, which, because they're so faggy, the only store you can buy one. If your motivation is just, to swim fast in the pool, you need a Speedo or Speedo similar of another brand. And if you find a retailer in Toronto that's not a gay sex shop that stocks them, you let me know.
Yeah, it's all board shorts at Winners.
Exactly. And I wrote a routine about it that I polished. I got all sorts of jokes about this. Like, these will only slow you down in the pool by a third. No homo, bro. They, who decided it was manly not to swim fast so no one sees you
Yeah.
have balls? Fuck that. I stumbled my way through it, and on my first comedy anniversary, I delivered a polished version of the same thing.
Nice.
And it slayed.
Nice. Good for you. We are over an hour now.
Oh.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? But I feel like we had a pretty good stretch here.
Yeah, let me you know what? It's been such a pleasure, but if I think of oh yeah, just have me on again sometime as your podcast thrives into its second and third year. It's going to be great.
Yeah, we'll see. Joe, thanks for coming. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Jay. It's been fun.
Yeah, good. All right. Thanks, everybody.